Since I announced the podcast, Lawrence, people have been writing in that are, I guess, former Wrestling Roundtable fans or maybe even current Wrestling Roundtable fans. We still get messages all the time that I just discovered the show. I wish you guys would do new ones. The main theme that I kept hearing from these messages is we want to hear the panel's thoughts on the state of wrestling in 2016, our thoughts on the current goings-on. Unfortunately, I don't particularly have a ton. You still watch every week, fast forward through Raw, watch the network, this and that. The problem is, and actually someone on Twitter said this on Monday before Raw, before everyone got their big upsurge in enthusiasm because of Sasha and Finn Balor, that it's the same old story. And that's been my problem with it basically since I stopped watching consistently every week like 9 or 10 years ago. The main theme for the Wrestling Roundtable in all our tenure, 5 years of doing episodes, is that they need to make new stars. And what we were going to talk about in our first mini episode here is something more topical than the usual weekly podcast might be. And the brand split, I guess 2.0, just started with Raw and SmackDown going back to that well again, too. And I guess the SmackDown roster, it's kind of like, let's bring the roster from 10 years ago back. But the purpose is, in on paper anyway, to make these new stars. And people are like, Dean Ambrose is the champ, and the Shield guys, and Finn Balor is going to main event SummerSlam. And that is great news. But my attitude always is, let me see them on the poster at WrestleMania. Let me see the main event, and then I'll believe it.
I think I can make your case for you in that the advertised main event for SummerSlam at the moment is Brock Lesnar and Randy Orton. So despite the goodwill that I have and a lot of fans have towards the debut of Finn Balor and the push of Dolph Ziggler, even though I think that well ran dry a long time ago, nonetheless, it does try to extend an olive branch to the fans that have been waiting for new talent, quote unquote, to get a push. Doesn't change the fact that they're still going to run a show, one of their big shows of the year, second biggest show or third behind the Rumble, where the main event, the real main event on paper to them is a part-time guy, less than part-time guy, and Randy Orton, who's kind of becoming a part-time guy. And you and I always talked about that there was going to come a time where John Cena and Randy Orton were going to become what The Undertaker and The Rock were, which is they wouldn't work every week. And Cena's transitioning into this now with all of his other projects. They would work 2 or 3 times a year on the shows that mattered. And that's kind of what's happening now.
It's been happening for a while.
It's been happening for a while, yeah. Brock Lesnar is kind of becoming The Undertaker now. They bring him in from time to time for a big match. Obviously, Randy Orton has been injured several times on and off TV.
Picking up his garbage.
John Cena, like I said, he's hosting the ESPYs and doing different reality shows, and now he's in movies. You can see where this is going. So the bottom line is, are they ever going to really commit to these new guys, including Roman Reigns, frankly, and have a show like a SummerSlam or Royal Rumble or maybe WrestleMania, forbid, they would actually do this with WrestleMania, where the main event slots are completely uncluttered by Brock, Cena, Orton? The answer to me, despite the goodwill from Monday and Tuesday, still seems to be no.
Well, the problem is that I don't know if it's just people don't learn from the past, but for instance, the other month when all the rumors were Vince actually likes AJ Styles now. And I'm like, well, if he really wanted to make AJ Styles and he cared about AJ Styles, he could have had him win the Rumble, but that might be asking a little too much. Fine. But he opens WrestleMania jobbing to Chris Jericho, just kind of like Dean Ambrose got squashed by Brock Lesnar. This, to me, does not sound like they're building the stars of the future, because it sounds nice that Dean Ambrose wins the title. People are happy about that. And AJ Styles main events the special events / pay-per-views or whatever you want to call the former pay-per-views on the network and this and that. But all that is to me is placeholders until we get to WrestleMania time.
Well, you made this point recently that you feel like the Shield guys, and then obviously to a much bigger and more obvious extent, people like AJ Styles are the guys who just hold the place for when these part-time guys come back to main event the big shows. And it's not just the part-time guys coming back to wrestle. It's also slots like The Rock and Austin and Mick Foley and Shawn Michaels getting, half an hour, 45 minutes worth of segments at WrestleMania. So to me, as someone who watches every week, it has felt for the past 4 or 5 years like the way they structure things is on these off periods, these off months between Mania and the Rumble and SummerSlam, we can do this other stuff. We can have these B shows and have them main evented by people like AJ Styles. And the network gives them the ultimate excuse for that because they don't really care so much about the pay-per-view number, so they're not relying on AJ Styles, who they don't think is a draw, or Finn Balor or any of these other guys who happen to be smaller guys, just pointing that out. They don't rely on Dean Ambrose and AJ to necessarily headline these B shows. They don't really care because it's on the network, and the network isn't a pay-per-view priority isn't a priority in the way pay-per-view was in terms of having to make sure that every month you have a big drawing name in the main event slot. Because when we used to watch in the Attitude Era, and even the last, going back as far as recent as 6 or 7 years ago when pay-per-view was still a factor, they would never risk main eventing pay-per-views without at least one of those names being what they consider to be quote-unquote an established star. And again, to go back to the original point, despite the goodwill on Monday, it seems it's the same trend because the focus of that show is going to be Brock Lesnar and Randy Orton, and likely whatever John Cena's match is going to be. I also want to point out this whole idea of Dean Ambrose is the champion. Now, Dean Ambrose is the champion, but he's the champion on the secondary show, and they're debuting a new title, which that title match has 2 more compelling stars in Finn Balor, the new up-and-coming exciting guy that everyone's been waiting for, and Seth Rollins, who everybody pretty much agrees out of those 3 guys is probably the best bet for a long-term investment. So that Dean Ambrose-Dolph Ziggler title match, I don't see that main eventing that show, and I certainly don't see it being as compelling as the Finn Balor-Seth Rollins match or whatever John Cena's going to do on that show. Therefore, Dean Ambrose is the champion, so what?
Well, that's why they have split pay-per-views again.
Another failed experiment from the past. Now, granted, now that they have the network and pay-per-views being a moneymaker for them aren't important, they can do that. Like they did last year, they did an Elimination Chamber and a King of the Ring, quote-unquote, pay-per-view on the network only. So I'm imagining that some of these SmackDown shows or whatnot will be, network exclusive, which is a good idea. It's a good idea to have network exclusive content because it increases subscribers.
Yeah, but when it's a cool house show from Japan, that's
right.
A different flavor than everything else, or a show in that vein, then it's interesting. Not the usual B show from 10 years ago type style.
Well, if you put, let's say, 6 or 7 of the SmackDown-only pay-per-views as network specials a year, that means that all of Dean Ambrose's title defenses are network-only. So how important are they? Whereas Brock Lesnar's appearances are always going to be on SummerSlam, the Rumble, WrestleMania, or against people like The Undertaker or Randy Orton or John Cena, who the company considers to be real investments and real draws. In that system, Dean Ambrose is a secondary thought. He's a secondary priority. So him having the belt, to me, doesn't really say much at all in this climate. So the brand split actually hurts a guy like Dean Ambrose, and it hurts the title.
Well, like I told you recently, when AJ Styles got his big win on John Cena, people were dancing in the street, on Twitter anyway, dancing on the Twitter street about this. And I quoted Magneto from the first X-Men movie to you. I said, I've heard these arguments before. Because we went through the same thing with Kevin Owens. He came in really strong. They did a great angle confronting the U.S. champ, the NXT champ on Raw. He got a big win over Cena on pay-per-view, and then they beat it to the ground, and it's back to the mid-card treadmill where these sort of, I guess, eternally optimistic fans are trying to make him winning the Intercontinental title a big deal when the Intercontinental title hasn't meant anything in nearly 20 years. In fact, I'd say the last time it meant anything was when Triple H beat The Rock at SummerSlam 98, and it hasn't meant a damn thing since then, and you know that. Stop trying to pretend that winning a mid-card title that nobody cares about, or certainly Vince McMahon, let alone you, is going to mean anything. It doesn't.
Well, especially when you're introducing yet again a secondary world title and you have other mid-card titles that are also not being used at all. And now you're going to have 2 women's championships, apparently 2 tag team championships, and the NXT championships. Plus, they throw in the King of the Ring every now and then, and Money in the Bank, and the Royal Rumble winner. With all of these quote-unquote prizes, how could something like the Intercontinental title mean anything?
It's excess. It's excess. You got 3.5 hours of the pay-per-view Sunday, 3 hours of Raw Monday, 2 hours of SmackDown, to say nothing of anything on the network like the main event or any other shows. It's too much, and all the wrestlers know it too. I love when the Big Show goes on Steve Austin's podcast, and Steve Austin says all the time, like, oh, it's too long. 3 hours is too long. And then Big Show is kind of like, yeah, it pretty much is. You don't want to trash it too much, but everybody knows.
I mean, I think that it's nice as a fan to have content. It's nice, if I was a kid now, to have Raw on Monday and I don't have to wait. I can watch SmackDown, which is something different, quote unquote, on Tuesday. Then Wednesday is the Cruiserweight thing, followed by NXT or whatever the order is. And then, if you watch Impact, which nobody does, but if you did, it's on Thursday, I think. I don't even know if it's on Thursday. So it's cool, I'm sure, for fans who just can't get enough of this stuff. But if it's not quality, who cares,
Right.
The other point I wanted to make is about this John Cena, AJ Styles, and the idea of making new stars, which seems to be a theme, is that it's not just Kevin Owens. Obviously, Rusev beat him on a pay-per-view, lost the next pay-per-view. I think out of the Bray Wyatt feud that Cena had, didn't go anywhere for Bray. He's still in the same slot. Dolph Ziggler may have had a token win over John Cena in one of his pushes. Del Rio, recently they brought him back. He beat Cena clean. What happened to Del Rio? He's getting eliminated in the SmackDown Battle Royal for the 6th member of the Six-Pack Challenge Championship. I mean, pretty much everybody. The real question is, when is a guy like that going to beat Brock Lesnar? When is a guy like that going to beat The Undertaker? Because you can't even get in the ring with those 2 guys unless your name is McMahon or you're one of the made guys, which is still to this day John Cena and Randy Orton.
Right.
They put Dean Ambrose in there with Brock at WrestleMania. They're champion right now. What did they do?
He squashed him.
And he did. He squashed him decisively. So until you get to a point where it almost like beating John Cena doesn't even matter anymore. Kevin Owens did it last year, like you said, and everyone highlighted it as this example. And AJ Styles less than a year later, same thing. Have these people who are saying that this is a big, did they miss something? Did they not know the story here? Like the Magneto thing, like you said? It's not even like the 2nd time that this has happened. It's probably like the 6th or 7th time. Go back 6 years ago to the Nexus thing with Wade Barrett. That guy doesn't even work for the company anymore. I'm pretty sure Cesaro had a bunch of matches with Cena. Pretty much everyone on the roster who's in the mid-card. Sami Zayn had a match with Cena and lost to him with his injury.
This is why when CM Punk says that his run in WWE or wrestling was a failure, because he wanted to main event, and that means go on last at WrestleMania. What does he mean by that? What we all know. They can dress everything up with bells and whistles or window dressing or anything else that happens before that, but what goes last is the main event. And him and Jericho for the title did not go last, nor should it have at that point, to be fair. But
The Rock and Cena.
Right. That's why I say, look, it's great. Finn's going to challenge for the title, whichever title it is. I guess, well, first of all, Intercontinental means of the continents. So you're the best wrestler on any continent. However, the world title means more because there must be an island out there where someone's better, and it's probably Samoa. So you're the world champion. So you're the best wrestler in the world. And now that we have the Universal title, then you're the best wrestler in the universe. Now we're going to get really scientific, and maybe we'll have the multiverse champion. So no matter what dimension you're in, you're going to be the number one guy. But anyway, back to Punk. He wanted to main event.
You could have the space-time championship. You could have people who cross the barrier.
But the point was that when these guys are the placeholder champions, like I said, it's well and good on the downtime. But what is the period that everybody cares about the most? WrestleMania. It's all they focus on anymore. And yeah, when you have the New Day all year, it's great. But then when they trot out Austin and Foley and Shawn Michaels, look, it's the guys from back when it was cool that we love so much. And then they put them over. The point is that, yes, everyone back then was so much cooler. And we know, number one, that the movie companies aren't ever going to allow this, especially with Brock. But we know the match that Vince wants to do the most is The Rock and Brock Lesnar. And yeah, it would be cool in a sense, but it's not AJ Styles. It's not even Samoa Joe. They can't be bothered. Even years ago when we wanted Daniel Bryan, circumstances didn't work out, and he was probably going to lose to Brock too. At some point, they're running out of part-timers to bring back. I mean, this is a company that actually seriously wanted to bring back Batista and have him wrestle Randy Orton.
At WrestleMania 30 of all shows.
Right.
And by all accounts of that story, they legitimately believed that was a bigger deal than Daniel Bryan getting his getting his revenge on Triple H and Stephanie after a year worth of abuse. Also, you got to consider that the most apparent example of this is the fact that at the biggest WrestleMania of all time, in front of the biggest crowd they've ever had, the main event of that show was the guy that nobody wants in this spot, Roman Reigns, who was going for his third championship, so it wasn't even like a big deal. It was not his first, against Triple H. I mean, you can't make it up. Our mutual friend Zach, who doesn't watch anymore, he checks in every now and then, and the first thing he said to me was, I heard Triple H main evented WrestleMania this year, or I heard Triple H was the champion. And you can't possibly defend that. I don't care what the story was. You could have easily put anyone else in that role to be that mountain for Roman Reigns to have to climb, to the obstacle for him to overcome. But it could have been Brock, which would have been the perfect story, because the previous year the big thing was, can Roman beat Brock? And they told this great story in the match, only to do that goofy finish with Seth Rollins. Why not Brock be the impossible mountain? Do what you intended to do. You intended for Brock to end the streak so that he could eventually put Roman Reigns over and pass the heat over to Roman and make Roman the next big star. Instead, Roman is completely rejected by the fans, and you throw him out there to die against a guy that nobody's wanted to see be champion since like 2000, and happens to be the son-in-law of the owner of the company.
Well, it's not even just making new stars, although it gets to the point where you're just so desperate for it, you'll take anybody. But it's picking the right people, too. You have so many great people on the roster. Forget even the NXT roster. Just look at Cesaro alone.
Man.
Do I need to say any more? This guy is supremely talented, gets over on his wrestling. They haven't given him much chance to do that with his character. And that's why people get this impression, oh, he has no character, he can't talk, or whatever the hell this goofy idea is, and it's totally not true. He needs to be able to live up to his potential, and these guys just aren't. It's not the same thing. Like, for instance, I always talk about the cruiserweights, and they're bringing the cruiserweights back for the smart marks who get the network. That's well and good, but to put the cruiserweight division on Raw, I think it is.
Yes.
What makes you think this is going to change and amount to anything when the same 70-year-old didn't push them for real the last 20 years the first time? Because on Nitro, which is what's known WCW for their cruiserweight division back then anyway, they would give, let's say, the luchadors 3 or 4 minutes on Nitro. Yeah, maybe they'll get 3 or 4 minutes on a 3-hour Raw too, but that 3 or 4 minutes on Nitro didn't have all these agents saying, don't do too much. Don't make the crowd too hot. Don't do that move. They let them go and do their thing, and that's why it's still talked about to this day.
Yeah, I mean, there's actually, I think, 2 points to make here. One is the point you just made, that until they prove that they're really going to commit to the idea in a serious way, it doesn't matter that you're just doing it. The other major issue for me is the lack of logic and continuity in the storyline, the storytelling, and the structure of the shows. Here's a perfect example. Everyone's watching this Cruiserweight Classic now. It's all exciting. One of the big selling points is Daniel Bryan's back, and Daniel Bryan's the face of it. And he's pushing all these guys, and he's doing this great job with Mauro Ranallo, who's his commentator on SmackDown. Well, the point is they're both on SmackDown. And they're the voice of the Cruiserweight thing, yet they're putting the Cruiserweight thing on Raw. Probably for no other reason than they need stuff for 3 hours. So they're putting it in the wrong place. And we all know that in the first brand extension, or split, because it's really a split. It's not an extension until you actually make something out of it. The idea that SmackDown was known in the original brand split as the wrestling show with the SmackDown 6 and Eddie Guerrero and all those guys. Yet they're putting these guys who are the workers on Raw. The other thing is they keep talking about how Cruiserweights are all about high flyers, just like on Nitro and train wrecks and, the train wreck spots and all that. The Cruiserweight Classic, if you watch it, they make this point constantly about how that's not what Cruiserweight wrestling is. It's about whatever the style is. It's just about the weight. No, to the people that love this, they're specifically talking about lucha style and
they want flippy stuff. We want flips.
To see people flipping around, man, despite what Dusty says.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with that if it's fun.
Right. But don't try and change what it is. This is what Vince always does. He tries to change it to make it what he wants it to be. Yes, literally cruiserweight means a certain weight class, but the style that it refers to is X division,
right,
if you will. So that's one problem with it, besides the problem you mentioned, is the storyline continuity. Same goes for the way this whole draft was set up. I have a major issue with the fact that they gave us rules, but the rules made no sense. For example, the first pick overall in the draft was Seth Rollins. Now, if I was drafting someone to start my new show and I had no idea what was going to happen with the titles, which means I'm at risk of not having the WWE Championship, which represents a combined history of like 200 years of NWA, WCW, WWF storytelling. If I'm going to risk losing that for Seth Rollins, does that make any sense? Why logically would a commissioner, general manager, head coach, whatever you want to call the authority figure, why would he or she not draft the championship to make sure that they got the belt on their show?
I mean, it's only the champion. The champion's supposed to be the best person in the company.
And there's that part of it too, not just the belt itself, but the champion. Now, here's another. You take that a step further. Stephanie and Mick Foley and Daniel Bryan and Shane McMahon were talking all night. And then again at Battleground, they were talking about how you have to win this match to bring the title home to our show. And Stephanie was angry at Roman Reigns because he didn't bring the title home. The only reason this was a problem was because you didn't draft the champion to begin with. Not to mention the fact that the women on SmackDown and the tag teams on SmackDown have nothing to fight for. We were watching the show on Tuesday, and we were saying, what are the consequences of the match between Natalya and Becky Lynch? Give me a reason to care. If there's no title, they're essentially fighting over nothing. There's no point. And then all of the other women came out and debuted on, they did this segment where which I kind of like, they had all the women come out and, this is your women's roster on SmackDown. So what's going to happen now? You have to explain to your audience what the stakes are for the people on this. They're debuting American Alpha next week. They're bringing back Shelton Benjamin. These people are synonymous with the great SmackDown tag team renaissance of the mid-2000s, yet you have no tag team championship on Raw, and the two most over teams, The New Day and Enzo and Cass, who are kind of different versions of the same thing, are both on Raw with the tag titles. There's no logic to anything they do. They said we're gonna draft 6 NXT wrestlers, superstars, whatever they're called this week during the draft. That was a rule of the draft. Why would they pick Finn Balor, who was great, over the champion Samoa Joe and Nakamura? Why was Nakamura and Bayley not even drafted? I understand in in the internet dirt sheet community, we know why they're not drafted, because they're not ready to come up or they need start. But the casual fans don't understand that. If you're a casual fan, your first question is, I like that Finn Balor guy. I like that they drafted him to Raw. Where's Samoa Joe? Where's Nakamura? Where's Bayley? Where are the other 3 or 4 most popular people on NXT?
Yeah, like if we were kids back then, it would make absolutely no sense to us.
All they had to do was say they're ineligible because they've committed to their matches or something, or even do an angle on NXT where Asuka's ineligible and Samoa Joe's ineligible because they're champions on NXT. They can't enter the draft. Okay, and Asuka hurts Bayley, takes her out, and so she can't get drafted, which creates stakes for their match at Brooklyn Return or whatever it's called.
Or even Nakamura's challenging for the title, so he can't be drafted either.
Or Nakamura is ready to enter the draft on Raw, and Samoa Joe takes him out and injures him, and they say, well, we can't draft him now because he's on the shelf for 2 months. And then his match with Joe at SummerSlam has stakes because he's not just fighting for the title. He's fighting because this guy cost him a chance to realize his dream and move up to the main roster.
Samoa Joe has lots of stakes.
I mean, the bottom line is all of these things are problems that you cannot cover it up by doing hot shot angles. Every summer for the past 7 or 8 years, they've done a hot shot angle. There was the summer of Punk. There was the Nexus. Then there was the 1 year that they had DX reunite.
Let's bring Undertaker back.
Let's bring Undertaker back randomly in the middle of the summer. Let's do the Daniel Bryan, John Cena push and the Triple H Authority. Every year in the summer when there's a lull right around SummerSlam, they do a big angle. And I have noted this every year without change, literally without change. By the time you get to WrestleMania, that big angle you did that everyone was so excited about is completely irrelevant. Did Wade Barrett and Skip Sheffield and Heath Slater main event WrestleMania that year against John Cena?
They didn't even make it past Survivor Series.
They could have milked that big SummerSlam match with Daniel Bryan's return to WrestleMania. How much more important would that match have been if it were on that WrestleMania that year? How much bigger would CM Punk's return have been had they held off to the Rumble or something? And then he comes back at Mania and wrestles somebody and then gets the winner of Rock and Cena. None of these big angles lead to anything. So why should this brand split be any different? Where do people think it's going to go? I mean, hey, I want to have faith. I want it to work. I enjoyed Raw on Monday, but while I was watching Raw on Monday, I was thinking to myself, they still want Roman Reigns to be the next Hogan, the next Austin. That's still the goal. And they confirmed that for me because right after Finn Balor had his big moment, they cut to Roman and he gave some babyface promo about how Finn's a good dude. And I'm thinking to myself, this makes Roman look even more ridiculous. He just loses for like the 3rd straight time. And here he is talking like a skateboard kid or something, talking about how much of a good, well, maybe he is going to be the next Hogan dude. He's talking about how Finn is a good dude. This good dude just cost you a chance to get your championship back. And you still show no anger, and you're still the focus. Finn doesn't get to have his moment because we still have to cut away and get a reaction from Roman Reigns because that's the focus.
Those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. And as we wind down here on our first mini episode, just wanted to point out that this brand split that people were so into and spawned the video game Raw versus SmackDown and stupid pay-per-views where all the guys are wearing blue shirts on one side and red shirts on the other. I kept thinking, I see through the smoke and mirrors. I see it for what it is. And I don't really see this brand split paying off until they get rid of it and they do the big final blow-off Raw versus SmackDown type match. And as it turned out, we didn't even get that. It just slowly disappeared. It slowly dissolved away. Nobody cared. Everyone was on every other show anyway. And I don't see how this might go any different. Don't get your hopes up. Look at the past. Keep your reserves up. Let's see what happens at WrestleMania, but we're going to have a lot more to say before we get to that point. We'll do more mini episodes. Don't worry. We talked about Roman Reigns, got a lot to say about him and the streak ending with Brock Lesnar and how all that got muddled. We'll talk about all that in the future. So stay tuned to A Few Words. New episode on Monday with Chris Harris. And thanks for enjoying and listening to this mini episode.